Hello everyone and welcome back to the Youth Political Activism channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Iowa caucuses, which happened on January 15th and the major political event of this year thus far to kick off the 2024 year. We have an election in November, and until then we have lots of different primaries, caucuses, debates, and this has been the one to start them all off. So some background before we get into the analysis as to what caucuses are. What is the Iowa caucuses? Is it caucus or caucuses? So we'll get to all that. So caucuses, if you're unaware, are very similar to primaries. Primaries are, of course, when you go and vote for a candidate before the general election. It's usually the narrowing down of, if you have a couple of Democratic candidates running and a couple of Republicans, it narrows it down to one Democrat versus one Republican for the general. Now, for caucuses, there's more discussion and debate in addition to the voting. So in this case, with the presidential caucuses, you have each of the major candidates have a speaker or representative known as a surrogate in caucus talk, and they come give a brief speech about why they're supporting the candidate and why you should vote for them, and they basically convince you to vote for them. And then there's some conversation around the candidates, and then they go into voting. There's, of course, obviously, as any primary election, what have you, exit polling, entrance polling, all of that to get a sense of what's going on. And that will be important as we get into some analysis of January 15th. But yes, that's the general idea for caucuses. And also, it's caucuses because they're all across the state of Iowa and all across states. It's not just one location in Iowa. There were so many different in all the different 99 counties of Iowa, and the different precincts as well, having their own caucuses. So that's that. And then each caucus has its own set of surrogates for each of the candidates. So as some background for the Iowa caucuses and the major candidates up until this point in the race, it was Donald Trump, of course, the one who won the Iowa caucuses. Shocker if you didn't happen to read this headline. Vivek Ramaswamy, who has since dropped out and endorsed President Trump. And then Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis were the other two. And then Ryan Binkley, he was a minor candidate. He didn't really, he got more traction than I was expecting him to, of course, but still minor, had surrogates, but wasn't polling in any significant manner, and certainly hasn't been on any debate stages. Ron DeSantis definitely and Vivek Ramaswamy were the ones to campaign around Iowa the most. I think Vivek was the most, but then he dropped out later, and he's also a lesser-known candidate, so it didn't go as far for him as he was expecting it to, I think. And then Nikki Haley didn't campaign much in Iowa, and Donald Trump doesn't need to that much because that's a state that's going to lean more Trump, and that's what we saw in the results on January 15th as well. So something to take into consideration before the night, during the day, would be the weather, the climate in Iowa. So it was very cold. I think it was around -3 degrees Fahrenheit when I checked it, which is very cold. So you have to take into consideration that as well, even though it's somewhat frivolous and whatnot. It's still very important because when you're considering a caucus, it's not as important as a general election per se. It's not like you're missing the chance to elect a president or anything. You're certainly deciding the nominee, but still, does your vote in a race where Trump is like 50, 60 points ahead of the second place person matter that much? I would argue that you do, but many would argue not. So many probably stayed home, but you have to take into consideration who are the different candidates and what are their voter bases like. So Trump's voter base is very enthusiastic about Trump. They will go through any weather, storm, tornado, tsunami to go and vote for him, even if it's in a caucus. Versus Nikki Haley voters, they're not going to show up as much. They're not going to be as enthusiastic about Nikki Haley, even though she's polling in second place. And the Ron DeSantis voters, a little bit more enthusiastic, but still not that much. Maybe the enthusiasm was boosted by how much he was campaigning in Iowa, because it was a lot. He visited every single county, as did Vivek. I think he visited all of them multiple times. So now on to the results of the night. So when looking at the results, I think we have them here, yes. So no surprise, again, as the previous headline stated, Donald Trump won an astounding victory over the majority, that plain and simple, the majority of the votes were for Trump. not only plurality, which is the largest share of the pie, but a majority, 51%. That was the only question of the night. Everyone knew that Donald Trump was going to win. As we, again, already looked at the polling, he has a 61%, almost 50% lead above Nikki Haley, the second place contender. And we've talked about this before and why this gap has widened between Trump and DeSantis, and now Haley and Trump. But really, this was the epitome of Democrat. I thought at this point that Ron DeSantis would really pull ahead and become the GOP nominee, especially in November, when after the midterms, Ron DeSantis was doing so well. You see the spike right here. It's really hard without having his head block it, but you see that spike right there from here to here. Of when Ron DeSantis' support absolutely spiked up. That was after the midterms when he had a huge success in Florida, won by 20 points, was doing amazing there, and people really loved him. And Trump's candidates, all of his handpicked candidates, basically lost. And so it was like, wow, okay. Comparing these to Ron DeSantis, just had an astounding victory in Florida, not just his gubernatorial re-election, but so many elections across Florida. Florida really had a red wave. That was the only state in the nation that had such an astounding red wave. And then Donald Trump, on the flip side, he didn't. He wasn't doing as well. Because all those handpicked candidates lost. So it's like, maybe this is the time when the Republican Party flips its page to a new chapter, and picks a new leader. And then you saw the gap thinning and thinning between them, and all the suspension was around when is Ron going to announce his candidacy. And surprise, surprise, he didn't until June. It took a long time until he announced his candidacy. I don't know why he waited that long. It was partly because of Kansas campaign manager, I assume, because he had a really bad campaign manager and campaign staff, and then he switched them over a couple months after. But, that's a mistake that he shouldn't have made. We could have been living a very different reality up until now, but he should have had a better campaign manager, and he should have joined the race, honestly, in December or January or at the latest February. Because part of the reason not only was because Ron DeSantis just wasn't joining the race, because he lost his momentum that he had from November, because things in politics move very quickly. Every week there's a news story. Every week there's a new scandal, something happening, some candidate saying something or whatever it may be, or some law or some senator. There's a lot of people playing in this game, and so it's very rare for nothing to be happening one week. And so you're going to lose momentum from November to June. There's no different way of saying it. You're going to lose it. And so you need to have it and run with it while you can. And you didn't do that. That was part of the reason that this gap kind of widened. And then the second reason was because in March, where we see that it really takes off Trump support right here, is because that was the beginning of the Trump indictments and legal cases. I think this one was the hush money case, I believe, was the first one. And then later came classified documents, Jack Smith, everything. Fannie Willis, Georgia, everything came after that. As Democrats, it had the inverse effect, honestly. Because even if you believe that all these indictments are, lawful and they're just doing what the Constitution, state laws say they need to do, it's still, you have to admit, that's somewhat politically charged. And so that's what happened. A lot of Trump support came after this, against the establishment, against Joe Biden, against everything, and up Trump goes and down DeSantis goes, because again, there's a new story. Trump is the new thing. No one cares about DeSantis anymore. People are rallying around Trump, who is being victimized by the DOJ. And then DeSantis goes down and down as we see him in more interviews, more public settings, more debates, where you see that maybe he doesn't have the great communicator skills of Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton or even Obama, right? He doesn't have that it factor that many candidates do, that Trump has. Trump has it. Maybe some could argue that Nikki Haley has it. Certainly, I think more than Ron DeSantis. That has nothing to do with their political capabilities, but just their speaking capabilities. Nikki Haley, I think, is even slightly better, which many could argue with, but I think that it just goes to show how bad Ron DeSantis is on a debate stage. Vivek is obviously an amazing speaker, the best, I think, out of any of the candidates, but yet he doesn't have enough political support or background to be in this race, which is why he dropped out. But Ron DeSantis is going down and down. Nikki Haley proving herself in the debates and as a serious candidate, and now it's here. But again, this is all negligible because Donald Trump is so ahead of everyone else that it doesn't matter at this point. I think we can all agree that that Donald Trump, I apologize, is going to be the Republican nominee. And then going back to just some things, yes, this is what I want. So, looking at the map from the results from Monday, Martin Luther King Day, all of 99 counties, except for one, went to Donald Trump. And this, if you can see, Nikki Haley won at 35.5%. Donald Trump had 35.5% as well. Nikki Haley won this county, Johnson County, by a single vote. If you ever think that your vote doesn't matter, yes, it does. Nikki Haley won this by one single vote. Otherwise, the entire state of Iowa would be purple for Donald Trump, as Politico shows it. And just for some extra information on the rest of the candidates, Ron DeSantis came in second, which again, because of the weather, I think, and also his increased campaigning he's done in Iowa, it pushed him over the edge a little bit from Nikki Haley, but still, Nikki Haley is second place as far as the polling goes. And then Nikki Haley, just not far behind, for 2,000 votes. Vivek Ramaswamy, only 8%, and then Ryan Binkley, honestly more than I expected him to. And then Asa Hutchinson, he dropped out, I think, on the 16th, so soon after. I don't know why he didn't drop out earlier. He was only present at the first debate out of, I think, 4 it was. Yes, 4. He only was present at the first one, dropped them out after that one. And then Chris Christie dropped out before the caucuses, but they had still had his name on the ballot. So that's that. And one other thing is that the delegates, I don't know if this map has them, but maybe, yes, okay. So the New York Times has them. Good for the New York Times. But the delegates, there are 40 in Iowa, and Trump got 20, Ron DeSantis got 9, Nikki Haley got 8, and I think, Vivek got the remaining 3. And this, as far as the delegates go, if you're unaware, the entire primary and caucus system is made to pick the Republican or Democratic in the 2019, for example, is to pick the candidate that's going to represent that party. And to become the candidate, you need 1,215 votes out of the 2,400 votes available. So you need a little more than half to become the nominee. And thus far, that's exactly what Donald Trump is in line to do. Another thing that was the source of a lot of controversy from Monday was how quickly sources like the New York Times, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, sources from the left and right, how early they called the race for Donald Trump. They called it, I think, voting started at around 7 or 7:30, though they don't actually get to vote then because there's still a lot of organizational, bureaucratic things going on. They're still like having the speakers come in and doing all that stuff. And so not many votes had been cast by 7:30 when they called the race for Donald Trump. It was only like 5% votes were in, or even less. It was, I don't even think any people had voted, or the votes hadn't been counted yet. It's just that some people had voted, but very few people. And the reason for their calling it was because of the entrance polling. When they polled all the people, they saw that such a large portion of the people coming in were saying that they were going to vote for Donald Trump or that they wanted to support him, that it just seemed like a lost cause or like a waste of time to report his win any later. Looking to our 2024 election calendar provided by Politico, January is certainly an interesting month. We have the New Hampshire primaries on the 23rd, and then March, even more primaries. February, even more primaries. And then March is Super Tuesday on the 5th. So many elections, not only presidential primaries, but also local elections. Probably, I know I have them here in California. And then April, all across the month. All across the year, we have so many different races coming up. And of course, November 5th is going to be the 2024 general election. Of course, Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic candidate. And I think, obviously, from all the polling, even like if you go to Real Clear, it also shows that Trump is much ahead of everyone else. We can see that Trump has a clear lead. I don't think that there's anything that can change this lead from now until March or April, when by then the Republican nominee will be decided upon. So nothing to make Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or anyone else, or I guess there's not many other people in the race other than Ryan Binkley, other than these three. So nothing to make them take this leap and get to Donald Trump, or nothing to make Donald Trump fall down. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think it's safe to say that November 5th, you're either going to be casting your ballot if you're a legal citizen and want to vote, which I think you should. You're either going to be casting it for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, just as in 2020. And it's certainly going to end up being an interesting event. Also, just as a side note for debates, I think that it's quite obvious that if Trump does end up becoming the nominee, or anyone who becomes the nominee, obviously, that Joe Biden isn't going to debate them. Why would he? He already has, he's the president of the United States, the sitting president of the United States. He's not going to debate Donald Trump. He even, someone wanted to get out of debating Donald Trump during 2020. He's not going to do it this year, especially when he's president, when he has the momentum for himself. And also, because he can't speak as well as he could in 2020. We have to be honest about his age. This is 4 years later. The man is 80 years old. He was 76 back then. He could speak much better back then. And I don't think he's going to want to be on a debate stage with someone who's a couple of years younger than him and can certainly speak faster and more coherently than him. So that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, we won't get any interesting debates this year. But still, we will have an interesting election night and maybe an election week if it turns out to be similar to 2020. So thank you all for watching today's video. Come back next time for another video on politics in America, and see you next time.